I want to talk hoops, and who better to do it with than Sam Quinn of CBS Sports. He did a ranking of front office executives and how teams have been run, and Washington came in way, way further down this list than I would have anticipated after the year that they've had and the tank being as successful to this point as it appears to be. But always love a national perspective, and Sam is on the Ruud guest hotline right now. Ruud, the most reliable heating and air conditioning products in the DMV. So, Sam, we come in peace, but I 22 out of 30 plus here in terms of NBA front offices that you dove into and looked into. Why the Wizards so low when it feels pretty clinical how they've operated the last year plus under Dawkins and Winger?
Okay, so I do these rankings every February and July. We've got a bit of a track record now. I say this in the story every time, and it always gets lost, especially by fan bases who aren't happy where they're ranked. There are a lot more smart teams than dumb teams. I think right now there are only 3 teams that I would qualify as being run in a way that I could not defend. Everybody else, it's varying degrees of smart. So for the last several rankings, I've had the Wizards in a grouping with teams like Charlotte, these rebuilders, where the front offices are relatively new. You're working on a relatively brief track record, but they're headed in the right direction. You just can't get ranked super high when you're that early in a tank. So Charlotte has shot up because they're starting to win now. I think the Wizards have, by and large, done well in the rebuild. They have acted mostly in the way that they should. I think they've drafted pretty well, all things considered, right? Like, they haven't had the lottery luck that they've obviously wanted, but I think Alex Sarr for a number 2 pick in a weak draft is looking pretty good. I think Trey Johnson is about what you'd expect to have a number 6. They got a win in Keyshawn George at number 24. I think he's a real player. Done some good things on the margins. I'm a big fan of both of the Champagny brothers. So I do think that they have by and large operated in the manner that they should for most of the rebuild. But a few things over the last year have kind of complicated this ranking, and I think have made the Wizards look a little bit worse in my eyes than they maybe do in yours and in the local markets. The first is that Deni Avdija is an all-star right now. Probably the single most impactful move that this Wizards front office has made was trading Deni Avdija for 2 first-round picks. At that moment, Deni Avdija was not that player, but they had him in the building before this. I'm not going to sit here and say they should have known that he was going to be an all-star, because I certainly didn't know he was going to be an all-star. But when there's a 25-year-old all-star on another team that you traded and the return doesn't look great, and look, Bub Carrington is still very young. The jury's still out, but I don't think right now he constitutes a reasonable return for a player of Deni Avdija's caliber. That really high-profile move has not worked out in the way that they probably would have hoped. Jury's still out. We'll see how that goes. The other big moves, the things that have really defined what this year has been for Washington, are those 2 star trades at the deadline, Trae Young and Anthony Davis. If you like those moves, I think it's obviously fair to rank the Wizards a good deal higher. Personally, I disagreed with those decisions. So Trae Young, I understand, given that you gave up nothing, and if you're just getting him in the door as sort of an offensive organizer on the short term, somebody to kind of help developmentally with the young guys, get them easier shots, get them playing within more structure, I can kind of get behind that. I wouldn't extend him, and so far they haven't. But having him in there for next year, okay, I can kind of see it. Anthony Davis, I don't. I think that contract is just too big. The durability concerns are just too significant. I don't think he was the same guy in Dallas. And even in the best case scenario, where Anthony Davis is more like he was on the Lakers than he was with the Mavericks, the timeline doesn't add up, right? He's about to turn 33, so by the time these younger guys are really ready to kick it into gear, hit their peaks, Anthony Davis is probably going to be past his. So I look at the way they acted this year, I just think they jumped the gun a little bit with these trades. I would have rather kept the cap flexibility, given myself some more options in the offseason. And I'm not even saying, don't try to win next year. I think that in itself was a reasonable way to act. I don't think you can rebuild forever. I don't think you can tank forever. So trying to get better wasn't crazy. They just went about it in a way that I personally disagree with. I don't think that Trae Young is a winning player, at least at the contract that he now has and is probably going to make moving forward. And I don't think Anthony Davis, given the durability and age issues, was the right move for them. But that being said, this is not me condemning the front office and saying, they've done such a terrible job. It's me saying I personally disagree with where they're at. All of this now so heavily hinges on what happens in the lottery in May. If they get one of these top 3 picks and one of these franchise players and Boozer, Debanza, and Peterson, like all this is forgiven. You have your guy and you move forward. What I'm concerned about is the scenario in which they don't get one of those picks. I get a little concerned at that point that you're now going to be good enough with these veterans in the building that you're not going to be in the lottery. Like, you're not going to be in the top of the lottery anymore, right? Like, you might be a play-in team next year. You're probably going to be closer to the middle, and you're going to lose access to that sort of franchise-altering player, and you're kind of going to wind up where you were before with Bradley Beal, where you were good, you were competitive, but you weren't really in a place where you could make a lot of noise. So right now, like the Nets, like the Jazz, like a lot of these teams in this range, you're just kind of waiting it out and hoping for lottery luck. Is that a horrible strategy? No, they're going to have pretty good odds. But by and large, I disagree with the aggression this year, and the Denny Avdia trade going the way that it has thus far did cost the Wizards. So again, don't think they're a terrible front office by any means. I just think the last year, in my opinion, has not gone as well as, I would have hoped.
Let me just finish the tweet here. Sam thinks the Wizards front office is incompetent, hates the Wizards and the fans, with all caps fans. Sam Quinn with us from CBS Sports. It's a thorough answer, and I really sincerely appreciate it. You answered a lot of my follow-up questions that would have been there. What would have made them jump up the rankings for you? Because, we're here. We were in the Andy Dufresne tunnel, leaving Shawshank for a long time, Sam. This Bradley Beal contract that you mentioned, they horse-traded him up to a point where they've got still a bunch of picks and a couple of distressed assets that at minimum they could maybe spin, kind of like Oklahoma City did. For you, A, just your thoughts there, but B, what could have moved them up in your rankings?
Well, yeah, I actually do think they did very well with the Bradley Beal situation in a way that I didn't at the time, right? At the time, I don't think we appreciated that getting these first-round swaps from Phoenix were going to be as significant as they might be. Having control over Phoenix's pick in 2030, given where they're at, that's potentially a kind of a game changer. Now, that being said, what could have really made them rise up this year's rankings? I think, honestly, the answer is very, very little, just given where they were. This was always going to be a tanking year. So unless, if Trey Johnson had come out and had the rookie year that Con Knippel has had, where, he might win Rookie of the Year and looks like very clearly probably a star, then maybe Washington could have risen up in the way that Charlotte did. I think Charlotte rose something like 8 or 9 spots. They were the biggest risers in the list compared to last July's rankings. But I think the fact that the Wizards were still in this rebuilding phase, unless they had really hit on a draft pick in a way that would have been unlikely and is rare, this year it was unlikely. The way the Wizards were going to rise at these rankings, and still very easily could, because again, I do this every February and July, so we will be revisiting this every 6 months or so. If these younger guys that they've drafted really pop, if they can take the sort of jump, say, within the next year that Charlotte took this year, then maybe when we look at this in July, when we look at this next February, it feels a little bit different. But what I would say about where Charlotte is, I would personally probably rather have Con Knippel or Brandon Miller than any of the young guys that the Wizards have. That is kind of my concern. Do you have a franchise player in the building? I think the answer is probably no. I'm willing to be convinced that I'm wrong. I think Alex Sarr has the tools where I could conceivably see him growing into an all-star. I don't think that's a guarantee, but I think he's on the right track developmentally. But I would like to see in a year, in 2 years, do they have somebody that you can really build a franchise around? Maybe that guy is there internally and hasn't quite developed yet. Maybe they get that guy with this year's lottery pick. But if they do that, if in a year, 2 years, or 18 months, whenever, they have that guy, that's the ticket to really moving up these rankings.
That's A.J. DeBonsa. He's on his way. Don't worry. No, but that's kind of the hope. And then
that's the hope.
Sarr and Trey Johnson, I think they're going to be really, really good players. To your point, is one of them a superstar or the number one on a championship team? I can't sit here and tell you with conviction that that's the case right now. Sam Quinn, CBS Sports NBA, is with us. By the way, you mentioned Charlotte. You had them 20th in July. They're up to 10th or 12th now. So you're right. They went up 8 spots to 12, which is highest of the climbers. All right. Follow up on something you'd said that I want to get your insight on as someone who covers the sport closely, which is kind of the trades that you didn't love. I would say, am in a similar boat, particularly the Trae Young deal. the first of the two he is not my guy. I don't think he's like a winning player necessarily at that position. It's like I like that one a little bit less. I was okay with the Anthony Davis one because they didn't really give anything up. And my big picture thought, Sam, is worst case scenario, you're out of these two things in the next couple of seasons. You have a year of one guy, you have 2 years of another guy, and then you're clear, and these are essentially expiring deals, which are assets, and the deck is still clean for the development of all the kids and whoever this top 5 pick is going to be. Where am I wrong about that? That like there's very little downside to the moves that they made.
Well, what I would point out is that Anthony Davis's contract runs those next 2 years. When those 2 years are up, Alex Sarr and Keyshawn George's rookie extensions are going to kick in. So what you've really given up is opportunity cost, where before the Trae Young trade, they were in a position where they could have had like 80 or 90, some incredible amount of cap space, like 80 or 90 million. They could have done anything. They could have, gone after whatever free agents they wanted. They could have acted as a facilitator in a trade. They could have traded for somebody younger on the timeline. There are just a lot of different doors that were available to them that now it's going to be harder to pursue. I'm not going to say impossible because, like you said, like Trae Young's an expiring contract next year. If you wanted to use that expiring contract in some other trade, that is theoretically available to them. That door isn't necessarily closed. I'd be more worried with Anthony Davis given the injuries. There is the world where, like, he plays 15 games next year and then he gets hurt, and suddenly that contract looks more like an albatross. But those years where you have all of that cap space, I think those are pretty rare, especially in the apron era, and I think they're more valuable in the apron era than they had been in the past because so many teams are desperate to save money. As far as the Trae Young winning player thing, something that I think has really crystallized for me this year is the league is really moving away from small guards that don't really defend, small guards that have to have the ball in their hands a lot. Like, if you look at the type of player that is struggling this year, that seems to have less trade value this year, Trae Young checks a lot of those boxes, right? And it's not just Trae. Like, we saw this with Ja Morant, where there was not the interest in him that there might have been in the past. Or we saw it with Darius Garland. Like, when do we ever see a 26-year-old all-star get traded for a 36-year-old? It's very, very rare, obviously. But I think Cleveland was less enamored of Darius Garland now than they might have been a year or 2 years ago because the league is sort of shifting away from players like that. I view Trae Young mostly as a floor raiser. I think if the idea is next year we want to be a play-in team, Trae Young can help with that. He is going to create an offensive floor just by virtue of how good he is in pick and roll and what he does for an offense where he might not be perfect, but he's going to make things organized and he's going to create easy shots. Yeah, that there is some value to that. I'm not going to pretend that there isn't. I tend to judge teams first and foremost on championship equity, and I think somebody like Trae Young is much better suited to being a regular season player on a team kind of on the rise than being somebody on a championship team, because in the playoffs, what we learn every single year, the regular season is about strengths, the playoffs are about weaknesses, and Trae Young has a lot of weaknesses. So that's where I fall on Trae, but the big cost for me here is the opportunity cost of using that cap space in some other way. They basically treated their offseason as their trade deadline, where they went shopping with their cap space, and they got Anthony Davis and Trae Young. If I had gone into the offseason, I would have targeted different players. I would have done different things with that cap space. I might be wrong. Remember, these are very talented players who have made all-star teams, all-NBA teams in the past. They gave up very little in the way of assets. So there is something to be said for just getting talent for nothing. It's just not personally what I would have done.
Sam, I want to sneak in a question about tanking. Everybody's clutching their pearls now as if it's different somehow than it used to be. We mentioned Oklahoma City or Detroit or San Antonio. Nobody look at their basketball reference pages from a couple of years ago. Now they're here as championship contenders. What do you make of all of a sudden people caring about it seemingly to a much higher level when it's kind of the same to me as it's been over the last few years?
Okay, first of all, this is so – forget about, like, the Spurs and the Thunder and the Pistons. This has been going on for 40 years.
Yeah.
I would invite fans to look up some of the stuff that was happening in the 80s and the 90s. Elvin Hayes, in the second-to-last game of his career for the Houston Rockets, played all 53 minutes of an overtime game because they were tanking for Hakeem Olajuwon. There was the Mark Madsen game where he took, like, half of his career three-pointers. This is not new. This has been going on forever. What I think has changed, frankly, I think the NBA has done this to itself. What I mean by that is that the worst teams in the league are almost always going to be awful. That's just inevitable. When you have 30 teams, there are always going to be 2 or 3 or 4 that just based on where they are in the roster building cycle are going to be terrible. By flattening the lottery odds, what the NBA did was invite more tanking from the middle, because suddenly it's a lot more valuable to be the 5th worst team or the 6th worst team or the 7th worst team. Suddenly you have real odds of jumping up in the lottery from one of those slots. So they've really invited these scenarios like Utah, and like if Milwaukee was going to sit out Giannis, we don't know if that's how it's going to play out, but like all of this tanking from the middle, because being in the middle of the lottery is more valuable than ever. And as we talk out all of these ideas that people have, these quote-unquote solutions that people are throwing out, I would just say, think about the unintended consequences, because we just went through this 6-7 years ago when they changed the system in 2019, and now it's led to even more tanking. I would be very cautious with all of the solutions that people are throwing out, all the changes that people are throwing out. I think it's going to change. Whatever they change could lead to unintended consequences in all sorts of ways. I would probably go the other way. I would probably deflatten the odds, escalate the odds, however you want to put it, something closer to what it was before this 2019 change. But I think it's looks more brazen than ever because of that lottery flattening, and also just the way the schedule turned out, right? This happened before the All-Star break. Usually we kind of shunt this off to March and April, and we don't really look at it as much. I think that it happened this early, and now, with gambling being as big as it is in the sport, more people are making bets and are maybe upset that teams aren't trying. So there are a lot of factors here, but ultimately I think the NBA did this to itself, and I would be very, very cautious about introducing more changes.
Sam Quinn of CBS Sports covers the NBA. We'll let you out on this one, but Danny and I have disagreed a little bit about this season. He thinks this is the end of the road for LeBron. I think there's a chance. I actually expect that he'll be playing this time next year. Where are you at on LeBron James's future? Is this it?
I think, and this is an uneducated guess, I'm not reporting anything, I think he will play for the Cleveland Cavaliers next season. Again, I am not reporting a thing. I am just saying I think it would be a little bit strange if he just played out the string with no fanfare on a Laker team that's probably going to lose in the first round. I just think he both deserves and, based on his personality, would probably expect a little bit more grandiosity than that. I don't know the exact mechanism. I don't know if he'd be willing to take the minimum or if they would have to come up with some sort of sign and trade that could get him paid a little bit. But ultimately, if you were to ask what I think he will be a Cleveland Cavalier next season.
Does Bronny come with him?
I guess you probably have to, right? I don't know. Could the Lakers hold him hostage and say, no, we're not trading him without getting a first-round pick?
Well, it's what I would have done on draft night, Sam. Stick aside. Like, I'm not here. I don't work for the Lakers. Like, there's like some gentleman's agreement. No. How much is it worth to you to let father and son play a softball game together? Come send me some picks.
You know what? If the Cavs are trying to win a championship, I would maybe try to preserve my roster spots for guys I could use. And right now, that does not look like Bronny, so I wouldn't prioritize it. But if LeBron James says to me, hey, I am willing to play for you for the minimum, there is so much surplus value to that on and off the court that if it meant I had to give a roster spot to Bronny and make that trade, fine, so be it, I'll do it. You're not getting a first-round pick, but maybe you get a couple seconds, we'll make it happen. But it's not going to be a first-round pick, it'll be something. But yeah, if he's willing to come for the minimum, you do what you got to do.
Sam, that was great. Thank you, buddy.
Appreciate
Enjoyed
you, man.
the conversation.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
You got it. There's Sam Quinn. Love the energy, the takes, the insight. That was fun.
Thoughtful. I like that. Even though I don't come to the same conclusions, I like that it's not shouty, show, that's ridiculous, it's preposterous. No, you didn't do that at all. Just, again, very thoughtful, even though we come to it from different directions. I think that's valuable.